The Legend of Zelda is one of Nintendo's golden franchises for more than 30 years. Every time a new Zelda game releases, it's usually a huge event, with the biggest impact of the series definitely being during the N64 days with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Masks. These two became universally praised games and are still talked about to this very day, especially with Majora's Mask and its more somber tone. But as soon as Nintendo launched the Nintendo GameCube, all eyes were wondering what will Zelda give us with this shiny new console, with the only glimpse at the time being this small 10-second tech demo giving us an idea what Zelda could look like on the GameCube. However, despite this clip being the thing people will imagine the next Zelda game would look like, series producer Eiji Aonuma was not really a big fan of what they were showing, as he felt like the demonstration felt very stale and uninspired since it was the same art direction they were going with the N64 games. And so, he and his team wanted to try something new with the series, which led to a massive change in art style where Link and all the characters have a much more colorful, cartoony look. With the only big problem at the time was that when they actually showed the case of the game with its new style, it led to severe mixed reception as they were not really a big fan of the cartoony look. Especially with Miyamoto, who was very hesitant on the new art style. But despite that, the game eventually released in 2003 with the universal acclaim that you would see in a Zelda game. Even though at the time, the game was kind of overshadowed by the next Zelda game, which was Twilight Princess, which had a style that people really wanted with the series on the GameCube. But keep in mind, this was at the time, because I feel like with these days, the popularity of Wind Waker has grown exponentially. Especially when the game got an HD remaster on Wii U that is one of the most requested re-releases that people have for Nintendo. And by the time I'm recording this, the Nintendo Direct came out and yep, still no Switch port. I was kinda hoping that for some reason me making a Zelda Wind Waker video would give in some dumb luck. So while the Zelda team were working very hard with Breath of the Wild, they thought remastering Wind Waker and Twilight Princess would be an effective appetizer for the fans. And it's not just a graphical change, because there's also a few new quality of life improvements to make this one the definitive way to play through the game. And this is going to be the version I'll be focusing on for this video, but I should also state that I also own the original copy for GameCube, which includes the manual and everything, so f*** you, eBay. I remember getting this game for my birthday years ago, as at the time I already beaten Ocarina of Time on my 3DS. However, despite liking games like that, Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, I never really beaten this game before. I mean, look at here, I still have my save file right there, and the last time I played this was 10 years ago. Oh shit. So yeah, I think it's way overdue for me to beat this game. So, with everything on the way, let's get started. So for the story of Wind Waker, it takes place thousands of years after the events of the N64 games, and right after the events of Ocarina of Time where Link goes back in time after defeating Ganondorf. All the people assumed that Ganon was forever gone, being sealed in the Sacred Realm. But one day, Ganondorf suddenly returns to the world of Hyrule, and without a hero, the people pleads to the gods for help. With their wish being granted by the gods, with their solution is literally flooding the entirety of Hyrule, which leads to present day with a brand new world where it's mostly oceans and islands. Which also brings us the newest incarnation of Link, being this humble little boy who lives on this island village with his sister and grandmother. With Link celebrating his birthday with a coming-of-age tradition of wearing the hero's clothing. But then suddenly, a giant bird appears on the island carrying a little girl who eventually draws her after getting attacked by pirate ships. With the girl in question being so happens to be one of the members of the pirates named Tetra. But as soon as she was able to get on her feet, Link's sister then gets kidnapped by the giant bird and flew off to the sea, with Link requesting Tetra to go after that bird, which leads them to the Forsaken Fortress, which is the lair of Ganondorf, with Link being nearly successful of locating his sister, but then grabbed by the giant bird and was flung off to the ocean. But luckily he was rescued because with the next morning he suddenly wakes up with a talking boat, who is named the King of Red Lions, who wants to help Link rescue his sister and as well defeat Ganondorf. Because as he pointed out, with Ganondorf around, the world is pretty much in big danger. And the only way to defeat him is with the Master Sword. And so, it's up for Link to travel across the various islands and claim all the magical pearls to show him the way of the Master Sword. Now, the story of this game is very straightforward with the first section. Now, there is more plot in this game, but I want to talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, as Link travels across various islands, they have different types of villagers who have their own problems. Like when you head to Dragon Roost Island, the Ritos have a situation where the dragon on top of the island is enraged. And so Link tries to explore the caverns to see what's causing the dragon to become hostile. A similar thing does occur when you meet with the Great Deku Tree, who is in trouble with these various monsters inhabiting the place. And also I've gotta say, I really adore the Great Deku Tree's design in this game because, I don't know why, but this face just makes me chuckle. And I've got to say, out of all the incarnations of Link over the years, Wind Waker has to be my favorite version of Link. Because with a much more cartoony art style, they want to have more expression with Link, and man, they really succeeded, because I find it really funny how other versions of Link he's like this badass knight, but here he's just this really funny dork. I always love every time you defeat a boss, he's just dancing like this. And the funniest part of the game is when Tetra is trying to think of an idea to get Link into the fortress, they just launch him into a barrel and just crash lands into the place, with Link just having this stupid Even though the first section of Wind Waker is very straightforward, it does have a lot of heart to it. And as for the gameplay, in Wind Waker, the main gameplay loop is pretty much identical to the previous 3D Zelda game, as Link uses a sword and shield to attack enemies while using various items to help him solve puzzles. A lot of the items from past games return, like the bow and arrow, bombs, hookshot, and the boomerang, but there's also a few new ones like the grappling hook, which allows Link to swing around, which can be very fun to use, and also there's the Deku Leaf, which Link can either use it to shoot gusts of wind or use it as a glider. You can get really far distance with this thing as long as you don't consume too much of your magic meter. But even though Link's arsenal hasn't changed too much between entries, there is one huge thing that makes this whole thing unique, which is since we're in the Great Sea and not in Hyrule, you're going to be using the Red Lion to travel across the water. With the help of this magical baton called the Wind Waker, Link is able to control the direction of the wind. Which is honestly very cool on paper, but in execution, it does lead to the occasional stop and go, like if you're trying to go in one direction but you want to turn a bit to the left, you have to stop and turn your baton to make the wind go to a different direction. But this is when the HD remaster comes in, because with this version, they include a brand new item called the Swift Sail. But first things first is that you need to find it during an auction, and sometimes it can be RNG. Luckily I was able to get it my first try. But I honestly say this is definitely worth it, because with a push of the button, the wind will automatically change direction while you try to sail the sea. And man, exploring these areas can be very fun to do so, especially when you try to get all the collectible treasure maps and try to get the buried treasure. But sometimes you can even find some treasure that's just glowing in the water. And once you fish it out, it's most likely going to be 50 rubies, which is very effective when you need to save up rubies for later on in the game. And oh, I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I've got to say, this game unironically has the best use for the Wii U gamepad. I like how it uses a lot of the functionalities of the pause screen from the GameCube version and convert it beautifully for the gamepad. Like when you're trying to sail across the sea and you're trying to see if you're going on the right path, and then you just have to look down and see, yeah, you're on the right track. It is also very useful of selecting different weapons on a dime as well. And even the motion controls in this thing is very solid as well, as you're trying to use your bow and arrow, for example. Yes, I use motion controls. With the only downside of using the gamepad being, unsurprisingly, its god dang battery life. I can't tell you how many times I fully charged the gamepad, and while I'm in the middle of the dungeon, I see an alarm on the bottom right of the screen saying the battery is almost dead. So it's like, okay, let me go away from my desk real quick and charge this gamepad. At least I'm in the middle of the sea with no actual big harm in the way, so I'm pretty much fine. Ah, shoot! Fire everything we got! Oh hey, this fairy doubled up my magic meter. That's nice. Now as for the islands, you are able to explore a few of them, with some of them having their own villages. That you can do multiple things, like doing simple tasks to get some rewards, doing little mini-games and such. And I don't know why, but the voice clips for this little salesman person lives in my head rent-free sometimes.
Thank you!
But with some of the other islands in this game, they also include the series' staple dungeons. Like with the first dungeon, you're traveling within the caverns of the Rito Island, where the main focal point being is this little grappling hook that you need to swing across vines and use it to defeat enemies. And even the boss fight works around with this grappling hook, which is very nice. Same with the second dungeon as you're trying to save the Great Deku Tree again, and with the focal weapon in this area, it's mostly the Deku Leaf and the boomerang that leads to interesting puzzles, and the latter you have to use it for the boss. Also, you can collect these various MacGuffins, which is very similar with the plot of Ocarina of Time, where you try to explore 3 different dungeons to collect their MacGuffin so you can unlock the Master Sword. However, this is when the weird caveat of this game occurs, as they're clearly trying to go for the original approach with Ocarina of Time where you're trying to collect the 3 MacGuffins through the 3 dungeons, with the collectibles being in this case being the pearls. But this is when things get a bit weird, because as soon as you try to collect the 3rd and final pearl to get the Master Sword, they just simply give it to you. Which honestly caught me off guard, because as soon as I finished the 2nd dungeon, I went on a small goose chase to find myself on this small abandoned island, and after the dead end I just simply go back to the village where I see that Tetra and her pirate gang return. While Tetra states that there is a big curse occur in the land where it's causing this endless storm, with the source being located on Link's island. And so, as soon as I try to go all the way back home after getting the bombs, I found this little passageway and it just leads me to a small cave when I was honestly expecting it to be a giant dungeon or something. But no, it's just a small little cave to hold the water spirit of this world named Jabon. And I don't know, I have a feeling that this was originally going to be the water temple of the game. Ironically, even though this game is 80% water, there is no water temple in this game. Which, honestly, now I'm thinking about it, I don't really mind too much. The water temple was always the weakest part of every Zelda game. However, I do feel like the Tower of Gods dungeon does make up the 3rd act, which is pretty much a final trial for Link to see if he's worthy of the Master Sword, which he ends up succeeding after defeating the boss of this area and gained access to the Forgotten Lands of Hyrule, where he was able to draw in the Master Sword. And so, after retrieving the legendary sword, with no time to spare, Link then heads all the way back to the fortress to save his sister. As he storms into the facility, taking out all the guards, and including this giant bird that caused this whole scuffle in the first place, Link was finally able to rescue his sister. But he has one final job to do, and so he storms all the way top of the fortress to face off with Ganondorf. And with the power of the legendary Master Sword, Link was finally able to get his ass whooped by Ganondorf. As it turns out that even though Link was able to retrieve the Master Sword, the weapon lost all of its power, meaning that it has no effects on Ganon, meaning that Link is in a severe disadvantage right now. And before Ganon was able to kill Link, Tetra appears to try and help Link fight Ganon, but was immediately taken down by the evil lord, who grabs onto Tetra, where his power starts to activate near her, and this is when Ganon realizes that Tetra is this incarnation of Zelda. With the young pirate being confused on what he is talking about, but suddenly in the nick of time, Link and Tetra were saved by Doritos, with the fire spirit distracting Ganondorf while literally burning him within the top of the fortress. And so, with Link and Tetra being away from Ganondorf, they then head back to the gateways of Hyrule, where back in the castle, the King of Hyrule appears, where it's revealed that he was the King of Red Lions this whole time. And it turns out that it was indeed true that Tetris was Zelda, as she's been wearing this small little necklace which turns out to be the piece of the Triforce of Wisdom. And after the king gives her the final piece, she then transforms into the princess. And as for Link, well, he needs to prove himself worthy as the whole world is hanging on a thread, and so he needs to travel across the sea and find the Triforce of Courage and power up the Master Sword. And as for Tetra, since Ganondorf knows her identity as Zelda, he is going to be after her for the Triforce of Wisdom. And so, for her own safety, she needs to stay put in the castle's chambers until Link returns with his fetch quest. Which leads us to the second half of Wind Waker. Now that you've done the first parts of the areas, this is when the game really encourages you to explore the Great Sea. As similar to the original NES game, the Triforce has been scattered across the sea and Link needs to go find them, with their locations honestly being very well hidden. And as for the other tasks, you need to power up your Master Sword, which leads you to go through 2 more dungeons, both having a somewhat buddy gimmick. Like in the Earth Temple, you're being aided by this Rito girl named Medali, who is one of the sages of this game, where she is able to help Link glide across different chasms. Or this little Korok dude that is able to grow giant trees that Link can latch onto to get through far distances. But it's also very important to protect them, because if you don't, they'll be sent all the way to a different side of the dungeon. And you really need them, because there are some places where they are used as a special key since they can play a little instrument, that way you can access different areas of the dungeon. Kind of similar with some aspects of the Ocarina from the N64 games. But as for the Triforce hunt, This section of the game is pretty much the most controversial aspect of Wind Waker. Especially with the original GameCube version, as in order to get all the pieces, you need to find these special charts. But the problem is that you are unable to understand them, so you need to find this little thing called a tingle to translate them for you, with a measly debt of 398 rubies. And with the Wii U version, there's only 3 charts that you need to pay Tingle to translate, with the other 5 are located by doing some certain puzzles. But in the original GameCube version, when you do these puzzles, you don't find the Triforce pieces themselves, but you find even more charts that you need to translate with Tingle. So instead of paying about 1,194 rubies to translate only 3 of these scrolls, you need to save up about 3,184 rubies to proceed through the game. And keep in mind, if you don't know what you're doing, you can only hold up to 500 rubies max unless you can find the fairy fountains to upgrade your wallet. So yeah, I highly recommend doing the Wii U version if you do not want to pay too much for this little thing. So f*** you, Tingle! I'm not even going to mention stuff like if you plug in your GBA to the GameCube, Tingle will be able to help you with the little handheld. Or when it got released on the Wii U, it got replaced with a special Miiverse option. But at the very least, you can also play around with this cute little camera, I guess. So now you can take pictures of the lovely environments, which honestly leads to the presentation of this game. And I've got to say, for a simple remaster of a GameCube game, this game looks freaking amazing on Wii U. I feel like one of the important keys of having a good presentation is lighting, and my god, they really nailed the lighting in this world. I love how very bright the world is as you sail across the sea. As you travel across different islands, you really feel like the sun is actually beating down on Link. Which, similar to something like Mario Sunshine, really makes this game feel like a summer game to enjoy. And I've got to talk about this again, I really love the more cartoony art style with this game. Even though it was very divisive back in the day, it honestly really helped this game visually in the long run. Because even back on the original GameCube with its much more simple lighting, it still looks honestly great and aged a lot better than Twilight Princess, since with that game it leaned more to a more realistic direction. As I feel like the simple shapes of the characters in this game really makes them very recognizable. And as I mentioned earlier, it made a lot of the characters in this game feel a lot more expressive than ever. With the only critique I can think of with the HG remaster is that sometimes during sections of the game they do get a bit overblown with the bloom effects. But eventually you do get used to it, but it was a bit jarring when you start the game at first. And as for the soundtrack, well, it's freaking Legend of Zelda. Can I say anything more about the soundtrack? A lot of the music in this game is really good, and it really gives you a good sense of adventure vibe. And I also like during the nighttime sections, the music goes completely off and it leads to this more ambience vibe to it. Especially when you travel through the Great Fish Isles where it's constantly storming. And when it's time to get very serious, it definitely has a much more somber tone to it. And with everything out of the way, I think it's very appropriate to talk about the endgame. So as soon as Link was able to power up his Master Sword and get all the Triforces, his trials is finally complete, and he is now crowned as the chosen hero. And so he then rushes all the way down to the abandoned castle to meet Tetra, where it's revealed that Ganondorf knew about their hiding spot and took her to his castle, which is conveniently not too far off the castle of Hyrule. Which leads to a mini gauntlet as you try to solve the different puzzles you find along the way, while being the respected bosses from each of the areas. Eventually, as you head all the way up to the tower, you then fight this giant ventriloquist dummy of Ganondorf, where the final confrontation occurs on the top of the tower. And since Tetra is unconscious, Ganondorf then grabs onto Link and uses all 3 of the Triforces into one. And with all the magical pieces in place, Ganondorf was prepared to wish for Hyrule to be his, until the king appears where he wishes the entirety of Hyrule to drown in water, which includes taking both him and Ganondorf. And so, the barrier that was keeping Hyrule afloat suddenly breaks and everything is suddenly flooding, meaning that Hyrule is no more, and since it was Ganondorf's life goal to take over the land, he then delves into madness, and since he's going to be going down with Hyrule, he wants to take both Link and Tetra with him. And so, it's time for the final battle as the 2 sword wielders duel, with Tetra aiding Link by stunning Ganondorf with the light arrows, which leads to the final blow where Link literally stabs Ganondorf right in the forehead, immediately turning him into stone. And so, with the evil being slayed and Hyrule going to rest, the king hopes Link and Tetra to have a good future in life, as they head out for a big adventure to try to find a new land, with the king escorting both Link and Tetra up to the surface, while he lays in rest being buried within the water. And just like that, the world is saved, Link then returns back to home to say one final farewell, as he then departs to a new adventure, concluding The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker. And final verdict? Still pretty good. Honestly, even though I haven't played this game in a really long time and never really beaten it, I've grown to really adore this game. I still prefer the N64 games a bit more because I feel like they had a bit better pacing to them. But even then, this is still a really good Zelda game. With its really fun and charming presentations, the very challenging dungeons you can find, and a grand adventure that really feels like you're traveling across a sea. Which honestly makes you question is that why hasn't this game get released on Switch yet? I mean, the Nintendo Switch has literally most of the Zelda games right now, except for the Nintendo GameCube ones. I honestly feel like games like this and Zelda Twilight Princess deserves a shot on Nintendo Switch, especially with the big hype with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But who knows, maybe they're probably just saving up for the next console or something, I don't know. This is Nintendo, you'll never predict what kind of re-release they'll do next. Maybe it'll be a 2013 game for the Nintendo 3DS by Next Level Games. Oh yeah, Luigi's Mansion 2 comes out this week. So the next time we'll be here, we'll be talking about the big title for the year of Luigi. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye bye!